Hi guys, so as promised we are going to do a video on our Associated B6.4. We've raced it for about the last 6 months on carpet. As if you've seen, and I hope you have, you've seen the short that we've done. We explained we're a, I suppose, above average club racer, and we thought let's do a video on what this car, what are all the setup changes for the average club racer. We're not talking your top of the line A final nationalist drivers, for your average club racer. So what we're going to do, we're going to break it down into 3 categories. We will do the car, we'll break down the setup things on the car, we will then come on to the speedo settings, and what we'll then also do, we'll then cover things that go on the transmitter and things like that.
Three, 7, 5, 8, 7, 6, 9.
So guys, let's dive straight in. Now, as we said, don't pretending to be an expert on any of this. There's loads of videos out there from the top guys who go into things in much more detail. We're going to cover things which we found at our level makes a difference. Certain things are so fine that we didn't notice too much difference. But biggest thing, obviously, shocks. On the Associated, the new Associated, you've got the 13mm shocks, which are slightly bigger diameter. Now, we found, as standard, they are too over-damped. So we've gone simple solution. We have put 3-hole pistons front and back, 1.6 in the front and 1.7 in the back. And we found that's a good compromise. I know some people put an extra hole and leave the standard 2 holes, but we've done that. It's a simple solution. When we used 500 CST in the front, 450 in the back. You can change it a little bit, but we found racing indoors on carpet that it was a good starting point. Apologies for the sun. We don't get a lot of that in the UK, but there's a window there, so we can't get around that. When it comes to shock positioning and the shock setup, we have actually put the shorter ball cups on the front because it gives a little bit less droop, so you get a little bit less weight transfer, and I think that did help. Certainly weight transfer, we have found, is something you want to try. We've got to make sure you manage that well, so the shorter ball cups help that. And we're using the middle, you can see the middle shock hole on the front, and on the rear we've turned the wishbones around, so you've got that effect. That's the middle hole. And we found running there is a good compromise. If you move them to the outer hole, or if you move them in at the top, it does mean you can lean on the car a bit more in the corners, but it does reduce that initial first response into the corner. And we found when you're racing on carpet, you just need a car to be razor sharp. Ride height, we run it as low as possible. We was running about 15, but I've dropped it down as low as 14 to try and just keep the car as low as possible. If you've got big jumps, you might need to raise it up a little bit, but 14mm seemed like a good compromise, and that's what a lot of people seem to run, 14mm on that. The caster on the front of this car as stand comes as 25, I think, there, and then we put an extra 5 on at the hub, so we've got a total of 30 degrees on the front of the car. Didn't really change that. We did play about it a little bit, but didn't think it made too much difference. We are running the alloy, probably can't see it on the video, can you? Oh yeah, there it is. The alloy front lower bulkhead, whatever you call them, wishbone mount, as opposed to plastic, which gives it a little bit more weight. Haven't run the brass one in this yet. So guys, as with any of this, if you've got a comment on this or you think we've got it wrong, leave us a comment down below. But we haven't run the brass one on this. I have run it on other cars, and I've found it makes the front end a bit lazy. Perhaps that's just me, but stuck with the alloy one on this. Just one thing to mention, I should have mentioned at the beginning. We do use these setup sheets. I'd fully recommend doing that, because even if you just run one car, you forget your setups. We always make notes, so I remember what we've done, what has worked and what hasn't worked. Just a little tip there. Now, one of the upgrades we have put on this car, you'll see it in there, is a lovely blue, shiny steering bell cranks and the centre link. We also run the alloy servo horn. Chuck the plastic ones away. Do not run the plastic servo horns. You'll strip the teeth in there, and then guarantee it, happened to me, it'll be when you're on your best run. You just clip a corner and it whips the steering back and just strips the teeth off that horn. So run the alloy in there, and running the alloy link or alloy bell cranks just sharpens up that steering response. And one thing, it's a bit of a minefield, again, I'm not sure if you can see it, you've got to make sure that you get the right amount of washers, the orientation of the steering rack, whether it's high or low, and was it the washers under there, to make sure you don't get any bump steer. Again, there's sheets about to do that, but just make sure you get that right. A couple of other things we played about on this. Did try moving the wing position forward a bit. Didn't notice any difference. Got a front wing on it. Again, didn't really notice any difference. Wheelbase. The wheelbase of the car. We are running the car short here, and I think it's medium. Yeah, medium on there. But we are running the short chassis, so it's nearly as short as the car will go. But I found that was a good setup. Standard rear roll bar, just to help with the front end turning, and we haven't got a front roll bar on it. Now, one of the areas which we played a lot with on this car over the carpet season was toe-in and anti-squat. Now, I was always under the impression that we ought to go to 0 degree toe-in, and just as a note, to do that, you have to change this block here either for one of the wheel speed ones, or you go to, I think it's the earlier B6.1 block, which is what we've got on this, and then it reduces the standard setting of toe-in by 1 degree. So you can get 0 degree toe-in, which is meant to help the car rotate in the corner. So we have been going to 0 degree toe, but then ironically at the last meeting we found out some of the top guys never go below 1.5 degrees. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we left it at 1 degree for the last meeting, and it actually seemed to handle really, really well. Similarly, anti-squat. We found, I didn't think this would make too much difference, but it did. When we went to less anti-squat, I think we run as little as 0.5 degree. It helped the car when it was going over some of the kickers. But obviously the car had more of a requirement, or more of a tendency to squat down under power, which then makes the weight transfer situation again, which loses it with the front end. So in general, I think we're on kit 1 degree anti-squat, 2 degree anti-squat and about 1 degree toe in. So that's what we've stuck with on the toe in and anti-squat. When it comes to, in fact, you'll notice I haven't mentioned the roll center with the top links. We're going to come on to that last, or last of the car settings. Anyway, transmission. Got the standard transmission setup. Gear diff, 2 gears. We found, and apparently when you run 2 gears, it has more of a tendency to lock up under power, which is actually what you want. And we've run anywhere between 10k and 15k 2 gears in the diff. Now, from what we've gathered, you want to be able to run as heavy a diff oil as possible, but still have the car to rotate when it goes firstly into the corner. Because when you're on the heavier diff oils, when you come out of the corners, the outside wheel, if you're going to go on a left-hand bend, as you're coming out, the outside wheel drives the car out, so you get more traction out of the corner. And apparently, I haven't tried it, but you can fit the X-Ray active diff straight in here, which allow you to run lighter oils, but then it does then lock up more under power, which is what you want. Haven't tried that yet, so can't comment. Anyone tried it in these? Give us a comment, see how that worked. When you come to set the diff height, obviously you know you've got 3 or 4 heights for the diff. You want to make sure that when it's sitting at ride height, your drive shafts are level. So in this instance, it means the diff has to go to the full highest setting, which makes sure the drive shafts are then level. If they're not, then it just, the handling characteristics are all over the place. If you need to add any weight to the car, we've found, obviously we've got the standard weights just in here, but we haven't got any weight in this car, but put it in the middle. We've found out it's generally best to put it in there. I've seen people have the cars very heavy at the front, trying to get weight on the front. I can't get on with that. Just don't know. I know some people I race with run quite a lot of weight at the front. I don't like that. Just doesn't seem to work for me. But again, leave us a comment to see what works for you guys. You'll also see we've got a slightly different battery mount. Now, this is just my thoughts. When you've got the one that clamps down, I think it really limits the flex of the chassis. So I've got this one. Whether it makes any difference, I can't comment on that one, guys. So last of all, when it actually comes to the sort of the suspension setup on this car, is the roll centers. Now, we have raised the rear roll center because we've found, raised the rear inner link height, because we've found we always want to get more steering with this. Always tend to be chasing steering. So we've raised the rear just to try and free up the rear a little bit. Now on the front, I only did this at the last meeting. The front is slightly different. This is where a lot of the differences are on the 6.4. you've got a slightly lower mount here, but there are companies out there, Wheelspeed being one of them, that run an even lower, I think it's -1 or -2 mil off this height here, so adjust your front roll centre. So I actually got the Dremel out and we Dremeled that down, I think 1 mil, and the difference that made was amazing. So it just turned in, that and the thing that I'm about to come on to next. They're the two things that we've done. I wish we'd have done when we first got this car, because it made all the difference. So doing that seemed to make the difference. And these tyres, yes, tyres. Can you see, guys? These are the Schumacher cut staggers, which, to be fair, in the UK is pretty much what we run most places anyway. Now, they normally have a horrible little bead here, which means the tyres move about like this. This is the standard one here. But what we found out only at the last meeting is that people are gluing these down all the way. You see they're glued all the way down there. What it gives you a little bit more of a rounded profile, and the tyre moves about less. So it gives you so much more, I found anyway, for me, it gave me more front end, also more predictability on the front end. So I wish I'd have known that to start with. Some meetings, they don't allow you to do this, but most of the ones I've been to recently have, and that was a real godsend. And on the rear, we again run these are control towies in a lot of places. We actually just cut off the outside row, because it just helps the car. It doesn't keep the car quite as firmly stuck to the rear. It just allows it to rotate a little bit more in the corners. Right, guys, so we're now going to come on to the ESC settings. Apologies for the fan noises, but we do run fans in these. I don't know if it's really needed, but just to keep things cool. So I have connected it up. Hope you can hear me okay. Have connected it up to the iPad with all the ESC settings. I'm going to try and be clever now, and we will then do a screen record off that so we can show you the settings. So I'll just quickly run through these. Running mode, you're going to use these forward and brake. Reverse force is not relevant. Cut off and all the protections we turn off, because you don't want your car going off during the race. You shouldn't get anywhere near them anyway. BEC voltage, 6 volts is standard. Remote off is, if that's on, if you didn't know, if you hold the reverse down, it will turn the speed off. Don't want that. All the rest is straightforward and off. Now, the ones we come on to, throttle rate control. The higher the number, the more punch that you've got. So we have played about with that one a little bit. 20, around about where we end up to. The other one is drive frequency. The higher the drive frequency, the smoother it is. So I've ended up on 12, sometimes go down to 8 if I want a little bit more punch, but I've sort of stuck with 12. You'll have to just see what works for you guys, but 12 seemed to work okay for me. Softening value, don't blow about with that. Drag brake, now I've got that quite high actually, 15%, because I run the hobby wing motors and I find them a little bit soft when it comes to the brakes. So when I let off, I do have that little bit of braking effect. And then brake rate control, we don't worry about. Brake curve, again, we don't worry too much about that. Brake frequency, the lower you go, the more vicious it is. Although I will just go back to brake force control. I found if I go anything lower than 100% with a hobby wing motor, it doesn't really brake the car hard enough. So that's all to do that. Now we come on to the timing. So we're running a 6.5 ton motor in it, hobby wing, because you just need that punch. Now you need the car to be nice and smooth on the acceleration. You need to be fast but smooth. So boost, basically your boost is your low and middle range. Put that on whatever you want. But we run about between 15 and 20 with the motors that we've got. But this is the key, where you have it coming in. I think as standard it's like somewhere quite high. Oh, 6,000. But we've got it coming in much lower. 500 or 1,000, so that means it comes in. You need the car to be accelerating smoothly. If it's not smooth, it will just take all the weight off the front. You'll have no steering coming out of the corners. And then turbo, this is just your top end. So this is when you hit full throttle. We've got about 20 degrees. Play about that a little bit, 20 degrees, and then it comes in after 0.05 of a second of a delay. And you can just see some of the stats here. This is what we aim for. Motor temps, max battery and motor, they're fine. Sorry, motor and ESC, they are fine. The RPM of the motor, we were around about 48, but then we changed some of these settings and we got up to about 53. Around about 50, I think, is what we want to aim for. So they're the speedo settings that we played about with. But do play about with, particularly these timing settings, you know, where they come in. If you've got a practice session, play about with them, because it makes a massive amount of difference. So yeah, as we said, it's having that smooth power delivery. And one thing I didn't mention was your slipper clutch. Yes, there's all these people that set them on the bench just to see where they go. I find if you get a chance, just stick it on the track and see how it goes. You don't want the thing, God, if it wheelies, that's far too much. But if you hear it slipping, you know, 5-10 feet, to my mind, that is too much. You just want it just a little bit, just so it takes that initial punch. But you want the car, and this is why these speedo settings are so important, to keep the car so it's smooth. Because if you get a big jolt of power, the weight comes off the front, and then you'll have no steering or less steering. So you want it smooth. You watch the top guys, and their cars are really quick, but they're so smooth out of the corner. There's no jolting. Admittedly, a lot of it is due to this as well. It's how smooth you are with your sticks, but you need to get that right as well. And one of the biggest things, ask people. Most of the top people are more than happy to help out. I won't say they'll always share every bit of settings, but generally we've found they're always so helpful. So lastly, transmitter. Now I know if I've got anyone watching in America, which hopefully we have, you don't really use these much, do you? You use the triggers. Well, unfortunately, I've always used these for the last 20 odd years, so I can't get on with triggers or wheel sets. I know when we use the big scale stuff, we do use them, but let me just show you the things where you're going to know. I'm pretty sure you're going to know. Most of you probably won't have got this far in the video, but for those of you that have, we will just cover these bits a little bit. There's loads of settings on this. Oh, you could spend hours and hours and hours going through the settings on this. But the only things that we look at are, well, firstly, so one of the things I've played about on this, we've only gone over to the Soundwire handset before, just after Christmas this year, 23. We used to use a KO. Now you can change the response settings on this transmitter. Now watch these lights up the top there. They're red at the moment. If I change that to SSR, which is super response, it goes to blue. Now when we race GT12, we found that going to that, I found it gives a car, just makes it a little bit more sensitive. Certainly makes it a little bit punchier. But ironically, last minute I went from blue back to red, just to make the car just slightly less nervous, I suppose. So that was one of the settings which I did play about with as well. Now the other setting that we use, which most of you will be familiar with, is the exponential on the steering. Basically, can you see that graph there? As I increase it, you see it moving. Oh, wrong way. Let's go that way. Basically, it makes it less sensitive round about the initial steering. So if your car's really twitchy down the straight, change that. Usually about -20 is where I end up with. And it just makes that car that little bit twitchy. But you can play about with it. And if you've got one of these sets, you can even change how you have it. You can have it as a curve. You can put all different points in. But you can get lost. If you're not careful, you can get lost. Did hear that some people, I don't know how true this was, run -50 on there. And the reason for that was that when the car goes into the corner, it gives it a chance to settle down. Then that last 50% comes in really aggressively and it turns around the corner. But I haven't had that confirmed as yet, so I don't know. And then the last one that we use on here is the dual rates. Now, probably the most simplest thing that we left to the end. The dual rates on this, you can see it's at 98, we'll go 96. It's basically just to do with the maximum steering lock on the car. Basically, what the dual rates do is they limit the maximum amount of steering lock that you've got. Now, I'm sure we're not going to go through setting up your steering, but basically it just changes the amount of steering lock that you can do. And depending on how good a driver you are, some people need that because they'll go into the corner full lock and the car goes round. Other people feel the steering. I think I'm a little bit more of a person that feels the steering. So that's the last bit on the steering and the transmitter. So guys, that is the end of the video. I hope you got that far and watched it, and let us know what you think. Have we got some of those things wrong? Quite possibly. You know, we've perhaps interpreted some of those things wrong, but hopefully that's a little bit of a pointer because there's so many settings on these cars. It's so easy to get confused, you know, a minor setting here, a minor setting there. Do you even notice them? There's certain bits I know I haven't even covered, but I don't think it's even worth making some of those changes on the car. That's what we found worked. And as I say, certainly the front link at the inner front link, dropping that made a massive difference, and also the way we glued the tyres. So I hope you've liked that. If you have, leave us a comment, like, subscribe, all that malarkey, and leave us a comment, anything else you want us to do, and we will be back again soon.